And when I come down now onto use, I can see that I have both username and user. And under user, I now have the entire ecosystem of data. I'm going to stop saying the word ecosystem now, I promise. I have the entire domain of content available here where I'm able to see essentially everything that I'm trying to access. And that is all of my GitHub data now annotating my contributor model inside of my system here. But you can see how now I have been able to sort of cherry pick out one of these relations, one of these connections, if you will, and put it onto my data model for what makes sense for me and my story here that I'm building, where I don't need to be drilling down and adding a whole bunch of exposed fields. I could just be able to really only surface the pieces that I want. And I'm not bound by top level inputs. I can also go as many levels deep as I need to. Hey, and welcome to another Data and API show today. I am super excited to have you joining me, and it is just me today. That's okay. Sometimes that's just the way the show works. And today we will be looking at the next part in our ongoing series about joins. And we have looked at both database to database joins. We looked at connecting Postgres, vanilla Postgres, if you will, to something like Yugabyte. We have looked at doing remote schema to database joins, where we actually took an external GraphQL API from Sanity and actually connected that to Postgres data. We looked at even just generally architecting with joins overall. When you would do that, what kind of use cases that provides for. Today, we're going to look at actually one of the more long-standing features we've had in the story of joins in Hasura, and that is with the database to remote schema joins. And now, you've probably seen this if you are familiar with joins at all, where we actually take that remote schema or that database locally, and we will connect that to some external source, some other external GraphQL API. So that being said, because this is a relatively long-standing feature, we're not going to be spending a whole lot of time in today's episode going over this, but I wanted to include it for completeness because it is part of the joins story overall. There are a lot of cases where you will want to be starting from some sort of set of data that belongs in the database, something that you would have inserted in there, sort of a curated list of something, and then annotate or expand on that with enriched data from an external source. The case where we had the remote schema to database joins was essentially the inverse, where we were starting with something that was a entry point, such as our fitness application model, and then we wanted to be able to let the user who was viewing that be able to see scoped in permissions and data for their own exercises or their own performances of that exercise. So it depends a lot on the application you're building, and it depends entirely on the application you're building, which of these patterns you're going to be going for. But for completeness, like I said, today we're going to go ahead and have a quick look at the database to remote schema direction of that relationship. And to do that, a really long-standing GraphQL API that's kind of fun to play with, we're going to connect our Postgres database today with GitHub. Now, if you're not familiar with the GitHub GraphQL API, they were one of the most early adopters in the GraphQL space, and they have had a GraphQL API that they've been evolving now for many years, and we're going to be working with that data. The kind of rough model, if you will, that I'm working with in my brain today is the idea of essentially kind of like a swag store or some sort of a contributor and then repositories maybe they have access to. We're going to connect a subset of data in our Postgres database that's going to be basically users, and there's going to be users and potentially the repository they have contributed for our community. And then we're going to be able to look at the GitHub enriched data, just all scoped down, already pre-searched and pre-filtered with our joins that we're going to be creating today. And then we'll evolve this just a little bit by actually locking down the API some more so that there's actually a really lean interface for what our data story is that we're shipping to our developers. Because when you're talking about joining remote schemas to something else, a lot of cases, you're talking about bringing in an entire ecosystem of API development that maybe your data story is only going to be 2 to 3 of these fields and not actually everything else. So for our use case, we're going to go ahead and scope this in and be able to provide both a lean API as well as a complete API for the data that we're wanting to send to our users. Okay, that's a lot of talk for me, and that's about as much as I want to do one-on-one here with the camera. So let's go ahead and have a quick look directly at the actual code. And to do that, we're just going to jump right into an existing project that I have running here inside of Hasura. And this is going to be, let's just have a quick look at what we've got set up here. I have a basic Postgres database. This database has a contribution table, and that contribution table has one column. That is a unique text column called username. And that is where we are going to be storing in our GitHub users and what they're going to be in terms of what they're like submitting. And I want to explain a bit more about where this becomes a bit more powerful in the Hasura world later on. But for now, we have this very, very basic model with yours truly, Motley Dev, right there inside of the database. Okay, we've got our data story, our data model here that we created. And then to provide the other side of our join here, we have our first remote schema, or in this case, it will be our only remote schema today. And that is going to be the GitHub GraphQL API. I have given it just a quick prefix there, or the name there of GH. We have the URL that we're actually targeting, and then I've passed in an authorization header that I've provided through my environment variables inside of Hasura Cloud today. And that is everything that I need to be able to actually modify this information. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the data. So let's go ahead and have a look at the API, and I'm going to have a quick look here. I'm going to scope out this query from some testing there, and I can look at my contribution model and see that we've got username here. Go ahead and refresh this real quick. It looks like from testing, I've still got some leftover data here. Let's go ahead and make this totally clean. We're going to go ahead and reload our database, and we're going to go ahead and reload our remote schemas. This is a nice little place to go look, especially when you're talking about remote schemas. This area is a great place to be able to refresh that data when you're connecting pieces to your system. Sometimes you'll have evolved your remote schema, and you may be in a timeout where the time that we've introspected with the available information at that remote source is out of date with what it is you're currently trying to do because you're iterating fast. And so what you can do in this case is be able to force a refresh on that check and be able to get everything up and running again. So back over the API here, if we have a look at our data, we're going to go ahead and see that on the contribution, we have just the username, and this is all the data we have. We have nothing else available to us, and that is fine. If we look at what we have available in terms of the GitHub API we've brought in here, we can actually see that there is a whole lot of information available here. All kinds of different top-level fields that are things that we would expect to see from the GitHub ecosystem. Again, GitHub is a whole product, it's a whole thing. And so they've got a lot of different fields supporting their entire ecosystem of use case, not relevant to what we need. So let's go ahead and use our own database as the entry point to this data story. So what I'm going to do is go back over to my data here, and I'll be driving this relationship from my database table itself. So go to my contribution table, and I'm going to go to relationships here. And from relationships, I'm going to go ahead and define a new remote schema relationship. And when I do that, I can come in here now. I'm going to just go ahead and call this one user, and I will choose my GH remote schema. And in this case, I'm actually just going to map it directly over to a user. And you'll see that I've got the annotation here for what my input types are. I'm going to choose login. I want to say from the column, and the column is going to be my username. And that's going to actually allow me to pass in these pre-filled values where I don't actually have to pass in any data on my own. So I can go back to my API now. And when I'm exploring this API where I have then my contribution model, and I want to come down now onto use, I can see that I have both username and user. And under user, I now have the entire ecosystem of data. I'm going to stop saying the word ecosystem now, I promise. I have the entire domain of content available here where I'm able to see essentially everything that I'm trying to access. And that is all of my GitHub data now annotating my contributor model inside of my system here. Okay, that's actually like already the basics. So we're done. That's we can go ahead and go home now. We've done a database remote schema join. It's been about 10 minutes. It was nice to see you. Okay, I'm joking. And I'm back. I just had a visit from the postman. Sometimes I feel a little bit like Mr. Rogers here, working from home with the with speedy delivery coming in every few minutes around here. But pleasures of working from home. Okay, so what we have here is the rest of our data story, and I was saying that we've basically covered the core of what it is we want to do. Well, we can actually pass in multiple different values. To do that, let's go ahead and create another series here, or another subset of data from our tables, where in this case, what we want to do is pass in some subsets of repos that we're wanting to like have pre-filled, right? So these are going to be the contributions people have made. Let's go to our data model here, and under contribution, I'm debating if I want to actually make this be a different data model here. I do actually. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Instead of contribution, I'm going to call this contributors. We'll go ahead and rename that table. And I'm going to add a new table now on top of that. It's going to be my contribution table. Just got to push all that metadata around here. So we're going to go ahead and make a new table called contributions. And here we will have our identifier that's going to keep us, synced across our system. So not the string value. We're going to go ahead and call this the username field. We'll go ahead and use a string value here. Whereas previously it had been a unique field. We're not going to do unique in this case because this is essentially a join table. And we're going to go ahead and use repo name here as the name of the contribution we want to pass into our GitHub ecosystem. And so, while I mentioned earlier a common use case here that we're gonna have, let me go ahead and put a little ID on there as well, just so we have a primary key. All right. What I mentioned earlier, where some of the value or some of the power of this actually comes in, is that we could have a system here where our if we had a GitHub action, for example, that we were installing on all company repositories, or somebody could actually install this action on something they wanted to contribute for a swag store contribution, we could actually be writing in, based on pull requests or something else, the name of the username and potentially the name of the repository, and be inserting this data into Hasura. We could have any number of dynamic data sources feeding into this table, and then we would be able to use something like an event trigger to be able to actually do another fetch from Hasura for the full picture. We could be looking for emails, Twitter handles, whatever else may actually become part of our data story. We would be able to actually have access to that here inside of a single unified API. We're not having to worry about working with two different systems and different kinds of tokens. Everything here is managed. My data ops here is all inside of a single API, and this is what's becoming a really powerful way to work. So I have my contributors and my contributions. Let's do a quick regular relationship here. So I'm going to go actually back to contributors. I'm going to do a relationship here. So a regular one, we're going to do an array lookup over to the, we're going to call this contributors. And I'm going to go ahead and use the contributions table. We're going to be joining on that username column, and we have our data now. So we have the contributors. Now under contributions, we're going to go ahead and actually try and get some additional metadata here, where we want to potentially have something like the actual repositories that we want to connect to. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new remote schema relationship here. And I'm going to say, in this case, we're going to call this repositories. I'm trying to remember if I actually have enough awareness here of the GitHub GraphQL API to find my way around, but I believe it is actually just called repository, I think is the case. And it looks to be correct. So I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on owner. And from the column here, I'm going to go ahead and grab the username column. And then from the name here, I'm going to go ahead and grab the repo name column. And so now I'm automatically passing in two values from this table that will allow me to be able to have this content. I believe that this is not a required field, if I remember right. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. I think that's not a required field. Well, I'm going to go ahead and save here, and we're going to see now that our data is going to be a little bit more interesting. So underneath contributions, we're going to go ahead and insert a row here first, because right now we have nothing in there. So our first row is Motley Dev. And then we have something kind of like our repository name. And I believe I have one in there called real-time game. We're going to find out together if that's a real repository or not. I hit save on that. And with that created, now I can come back over to the API. We can explore the data we actually have available. And let's have a look and see what we get. So we've got our user. We have the contributions. We have the user. That's contributions. We want to have contributors. There we go. We're going to get the user information on that. We're going to get the name. Then we're going to go ahead and get the contributions. It's looking like I might have mislabeled that relationship. I did. Let me just fix that real quick. We'll go back over to remote schemas. We're going to copy this to our pasteboard, remote schemas. It's not remote schemas. We're going to go to contributions, relationships, edit this one here. Repositories was the name we were going for. All right. All right. So we're going to go back here, and we're going to say repositories. I actually, it's a half, right? We go back over to data. Okay, we got contributors, relationships, and I mislabeled this here. So this should be contributions. All right, go ahead and save there. Now back over to our API. Now we're cooking with gas. We got contributors, we got the user, we got the name, we got contributions. And underneath contributions, we're going to go ahead and be able to get our repositories. And under those repositories, we're going to be able to see all of the information we want to potentially be able to grab. So we have I'm not sure exactly what information I would pull out of this in this case, but we're going to go ahead and show the ID and maybe all kinds of data in this GitHub repository. Yeah, why not? We'll just go ahead and say primary language. That's some kind of a drop down. Okay, so we have this data here. We go ahead and hit run. And we can see now that we've got this scoped in data here where we have the contributors, we have the name, we have the contributions, we have the repositories. So I have not passed in any specific input fields here to filter down or search or anything else inside of the GitHub ecosystem. So instead of having to pass in one field looking for repositories or then looking for users, running searches or anything else, I've been able to actually very neatly be able to describe the data that I want to actually have access to here. So that's already a really powerful way to be able to ship a much cleaner API to our developers for them to be able to work with and kind of reason about what data is there. I mean, if you look at the total surface area, it's a massive surface area that potentially would be overwhelming our developers. You introduce a Stripe API, and you introduce GitHub API, and you introduce a warehouse API, and before you know it, you've got 30 or more top level fields. And what our application and our business that we're actually working on really only impacts like contributors, maybe for a top level field. So this is a really helpful way for us to be able to work. Let's go ahead and actually see how would we go about still benefiting and leveraging these remote sources, but with the ability to actually keep these trimmed down. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my cloud project here from projects. And I want to navigate over to my demo here today on the back end. And you'll see under my environment variables that I have provided a token here that is the Hasura GraphQL enable remote schema permissions, and that is set to true. You can define this in your Docker Compose file or underneath your runtime environments. But this is where I'm using for cloud. It's underneath this dashboard here. And that enables me to be able to go to my remote schemas. So for the sake of time, we're not going to actually modify this schema. I'm going to go ahead and just show you roughly how it would look. If you were to come in here, make, for example, a role named user, we'd be able to come in here and be able to modify this entire API quite heavily to be able to turn on and turn off different fields of what we're actually exposing. This is something that's still an experimental feature. It's not something we're going to be exploring on today's show, but this is something you can have a look at, and this would be a great way to be able to limit down the amount of fields that you're actually wanting to ultimately surface to the user. So now, while that is actually interesting and that's a helpful way to work, what we're going to be able to see as well is that we can be able to modify this even more, and we are not restricted by the amount of nested fields that we pass into our relationship. If we were to come here, we'll see that we could actually simulate a failure underneath our API here. I have a listing here where I've got my commit messages of nodes and body text of that. If I go ahead and I run those, we're going to see that it's missing a pagination boundary, and that's something that I'd have to pass in as well. Let's say, again, for the sake of my data story here, if you will, what I'm really wanting to accomplish is being able to surface these, and I want to maybe just surface the top 5 or something. I'm going to go ahead and modify the relationships again here. In this case, I'm going to add another one that's going to be a top level relationship. And I'm going to add a new remote relationship here that I'm going to go ahead and call, just top comments. And these top comments, actually, I think I've got under case casing for most of this. So we're going to go ahead and do this. Top comments. I'm going to go ahead and pass in a series of deeper nested restrictions. So I'm going to go back to the repository in this case, and I'm just wanting to get the comments on the repositories. I'm going to go ahead and say that this the owner is going to again be from my repo or my username field. The name of the repository is going to be coming in from the username here, sorry, repo name. And then I'm going to drill down all the way to my my commit comments, actually. So I'm going to head down here to commit comments, and I'm going to pass in a specific pagination here. In this case, it is going to be the first 5 as a static value. And what you're going to see here that happens is that we are now returning this field, this sub relationship commit messages is being mapped with these input arguments to the name here, top comments. So if I save this, we're going to go back to our data here, and underneath this API, if I come here now, you're going to see that I can turn off my commit comments here. So I'm going to just remove all of my repository information. I think that's about how many levels out I need to go. Maybe it's one more. And here now, I'm going to go ahead and say top comments. And I'm going to look at my nodes there and grab that body text. And that's passed in all of the arguments that I was expecting from my pagination. Again, I don't have anything here, but you can see how now I have been able to sort of cherry pick out one of these relations, one of these connections, if you will, and put it onto my data model for what makes sense for me and my story here that I'm building, where I don't need to be drilling down and adding a whole bunch of exposed fields. I could just be able to really only surface the pieces that I want. And I'm not bound by top level inputs. I can also go as many levels deep as I need to. Okay, so that's basically the story here. And again, this is a feature we've had for a little while at Hasura, where you can connect remote schemas to databases. I think that this, when you see the ability of being able to tailor the way this API looks, you start to see some of the power of what it really means to craft this data story or this data layer, if you will, for your project. You can say, I don't need all of GitHub, or I don't need all of Stripe or whatever else to be exposed to my clients. I'm just saying, I really just want you to be able to get access to this bit of data because that's what makes sense to my product. And when you're able to craft this down in this way, you're able to very carefully sort of shape what it is that you're shipping to your developers. And I think that's becoming just really a very powerful way to build. It is an important part of the data join story. It's an important part of how we work with products here inside of Hasura. When you work with this and then you start adding on other additional features like events or actions with the ability to have relationships to those actions, where you could actually be able to now insert a new user and be able to fetch just the subfields you're looking for. You've got a very lean but complete data surface area that you're able to build products with quickly. That's it. I told you today is going to be a short one. I'm not going to take any more of your time. We will see you for next week, and that is going to be on the remote schema to remote schema relations. It's the last part of our joins story. And then we will be doing a summer break. So join us next week for the last one. We'll see you there, and have a great rest of your day, and happy building.